Good morning and welcome back to Coffee with Toffees, the Dota 2 morning show for you, the fans, made by us, the community. And I'm excited to be here today, guys. If you have seen the show before, you know the plugs that are on the way. You can follow me at Twitter at Toffees_Dota2. You can catch the show on podcast. You can catch it on SoundCloud.com/Toffees_Dota2 for the RSS feed as well if you're not into using iTunes. And then, of course, the YouTube channel, which is linked below, has the live replays. And last but not least, if you want to support the show, we're trying our best to keep it from having advertisers. I've been approached by different groups that want to buy space or do things like sort of change a little bit of the format, and I don't want to do that, so we've decided to launch a grassroots thing called Patreon. You can find it at patreon.com/Toffees, and we're allowing just fan funding so that we can keep this thing grassroots and focus on covering our costs and just doing it for you, because that's why we do it in the first place. That said, I am joined today by my guest. His name's Blaze. He goes by @BlazeCasting. He is a freelance co-caster who works for JT and BTS right now. And I believe will be joining the Dota Dads Club in less than a month. How are you doing this morning, Blaze?
Doing pretty good. Bright and early for me, but not too unaccustomed to that, as I do a lot of Southeastern Asian and Chinese casting, so it's pretty good. Got the sun shining, and happy to be talking with you, man.
Thanks.
I'm
It's nice
so
to
into the normal rhythm right here, man. I'm like, okay, well, I'm casting somebody, I'm on the microphone, but honestly, I'm a little more nervous here talking with you. I'm doing something different than I am talking to 20,000 people with LD or Ziori.
Wow, you see, that's meaningful. That's me. Our show, guys, our show with all six of us who watch live is making Blaze nervous. So that makes me feel good, because maybe we've come a long way, baby, from us waking up early in the morning and just spending that together. Great to have you. It's nice to look outside, see a great day out here on the East Coast. I think, are you from the East Coast as well?
Yeah.
So you're also having a nice day. It's a lovely fall afternoon. Can't get behind it much more. We'll talk more about the Dads Club and some other stuff that you've got in the works as we move forward. But before we do that, let's start out with the traditional segment, Pro News, guys. So running through the news, first thing we're going to talk about is DK has announced their new roster with Burning as a coach. New talent in a new era for a legendary team. The Dota Kings come back. For those of you who want to know the roster, it is CTY, Hansi, DreamyU, Kun, and I think you say the name Quinn. I don't know for sure how to pronounce it. But these are a lot of players who've been kind of up and coming. They've played with people like VG, Rising Stars, a lot of these smaller teams, For Love, CNB, and have been put together into, I think what DK is trying to put together here is, instead of creating a all-star team from trades like some of the other Eastern teams seem to be doing, they're building from the ground up, putting together what they would call an all-star crew, and with a coach like Burning just going to develop that. Do you think that is a good way to go about starting your team, or do you think making the big trades like VG and some of the others is the way to secure yourself a TI victory?
Well, I honestly don't think that players like Hansu and CTY are that far below what we consider the Tier 1 players of China already. So I don't think that's going to be that bad on them, even though they're not holding out the big names. As long as they have the right direction. It really depends on how invested Burning gets with it. I know he's trying to do casting as well, so depending on how much he contributes, and obviously how much support DK intend to give, because they've always had a great history of doing that, just getting the great environment for them to train, for them to practice, and for them to become those Tier 1 players in a very short span of time.
Absolutely. And like you said, I think if Burning invests, this is going to be a great thing to see. They are, you're right, using some Tier 2 players, some folks who are already sort of established. This reminds me a little bit of the eHug experiment maybe that went on in the US about a year ago. Hopefully, though, a bit more organized or a bit more synergetic than we had with the eHug house. As that was also a group of players who were, I'd say, Tier 2, a couple of pub stars, but some great players in North America who were put together with the same intention of building a team from the ground up. So we'll see how it goes this time around. Other pro news that we talk about today is, the big one is the S4 AMA that went on over on Reddit today, or I believe it was actually Friday afternoon, if I remember correctly. Anyway, so what we did is my producer Snuggies sat down and went through all of the Reddit posts, slogged through it like the champion that he is, so that we could give you a short summary of the show today. So first and foremost, did you get a chance to read it at all, Blaze?
Yeah, skimmed through it. Obviously, there have been a lot of AMAs recently, but
Mhm.
this one was particularly interesting.
It was pretty interesting. I felt it was a very low key. In some ways, it felt almost forced. Some of the answers that S4 gave, like he was maybe being prompted to put together this sort of PR bit, as opposed to some of the other AMAs. Just seemed like Loda, for instance. I don't know if you read his. He seemed like he actually was really excited to be doing the AMA. His answers were really good, super concise, and actually well prepared. So I liked that a lot. S4s were good. It just felt like they were very short. To the point answers, a little more like let's get in and get out, and we'll show you that in just a second. So the summary, we went through 8 of the top questions and answers that came out on the AMA, and we'll just kind of run through them. Blaze, if you have an opinion on any of them, feel free to jump in at any point. There wasn't a ton of news this weekend, so we can talk as much as we want to. So, first question. When did you know you were good at Dota? That was an interesting question, right? And S4 comes back with the answer and just says, I'm still not sure, which I thought was a pretty cool answer. It showed humility in a lot of ways. I mean, I don't know that there was another answer he could have given that the fans wouldn't have given him a hard time about. But at the end of the day, one of the best mids in the world says, I'm still not sure that I'm good at the game. That's a little bit, it's a little heartwarming to see that, if that makes sense. Number 2 question is Radiant or Dire? He picks Dire. Not a big surprise there. The Dire advantage, really powerful, especially with things like Lycan on the board, because it forces the Radiant pick, or ban rather. Some teams will say Radiant because of the way the jungle format is, but it seems like that's the popular answer among pros right now, to pick the Dire side. Third question, is Big Daddy really that loud? And his response is yes, he really is. So I thought that was pretty fun. There was actually a couple of really good Big Daddy posts about his name and if he'll ever go back to the original name. And it was, I think S4 responded and said, well, first we've got to convince him to be Smaller Daddy and Little Daddy before he's willing to go back to his original name. So it sounds like Big Daddy's flying high after his TI performances and is having a great time being the new alter ego that sort of developed from the fans. So here's an interesting part. At one point during the AMA, YouPorn actually hijacked the thread and got a lot of attention from Redditors. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about it, the whole YouPorn sponsoring situation thing that's going on. I will say this, that AC posted at this point on the YouPorn sort of diatribe, and he said this, and this is a direct quote from him: "This is no tease, it's a post for attention and speculation, which anyone with sense would ignore. Team Secret, will 100% not be sponsored by YouPorn." And I think that there's a couple of reasons he said this. The first and foremost is it doesn't really fit maybe the tenor of the game, but more importantly, it really just seems like these guys are doing it for advertising and attention and are trying to just sidetrack any post on any esports forum they can. And I hate giving them more attention here, but I gotta say, if you see it, if you see them out there, the more we upvote, the more that we think they're serious, the more we talk about it, the more they get what they want. So, I don't know. I mean, do you think that this is something that's a legitimate sponsor opportunity, or is it something that's just sort of advertising for a website?
I definitely think it's more on the advertising side.
Mhm.
Obviously, we'll see in months or whatever if they actually try to shell out some cash for it. But I've actually given my opinion quite clearly that
Yeah.
I still don't think that there's much place for that right now in esports. I mean, we already have a lot of money flowing in from a lot of different revenue streams, and
Yeah.
having a pornographic website, just in general, the public image of esports is kind of, I don't know. It's not it's not like it's gonna die the second that this
Right.
is involved, but it doesn't contribute much. And it's just, if a team's going to sign with them, there's going to be so many different complications with tournaments and all this other stuff. It's definitely something that a team like Team Secret definitely doesn't need. But
Yeah.
I would say that anything above tier 2 doesn't really need that kind of money.
Absolutely. I agree completely with that. So we'll move right past it on to question 5. S4, which heroes would you say are the best for climbing up the ranked MMR ladders? His answer, TA Storm Razor. Now, that's interesting because obviously that's from a mid player's perspective, the old you've got to be a core to advance sort of mentality. But I think that you did something pretty epic with support players, or support heroes, in your climb in MMR. Is that not true?
Oh yeah, definitely. Pretty much purely playing support. I got to 5K, which I think is a decent accomplishment there. I'm not that mechanically skilled, but obviously I know a decent amount of the game to be casting and all that. But yeah, I think like 95% of my games were support plays. Sometimes you have to switch it up a little bit and be flexible for the team. But fortunately, that's the one role that's almost always open. Like, you
Yeah.
only get one in 40 games. That's not going to be two
Right.
support roles open right off the bat. So, yeah, you pick up something that responds well, ganks early, is active across the map, and just controls lanes very efficiently. Like, he also talks a little bit later about creequilibrium and kind of the blocking and reestablishing where the lane meets. And
Right.
that's something that the support has a lot more control over than the carry does, in fact. So, with that, I think that you can really impact the game very directly. And although I definitely think from his perspective, yeah, TA Storm Razor, that's awesome, and it is kind of that hero that can just stomp really quickly if he's not very directly countered. All the same, you can't just look at that post and say, well, okay, I'll pick those three heroes and I'll automatically gain 500 MMR. That's
Right.
not how it works. That's not how Dota works. You respond to what is necessary for the team, and when you bring that to the table and know intimately what is necessary to accomplish to win the game, then that's going to bring you to victory.
There you go. So, what do you mind asking what MMR you started out with on your support climb?
Oh, wow. That was, I think I calibrated at 3850.
Okay.
Lost a couple games and then climbed high, got 5125, and then ever since TI4, it's kind of been downhill. I'm at like 4.8 right now.
Yeah.
So in a flux there, but I can call myself X5K at the very least.
Yeah, absolutely. You can get vouched into NEL at this point. So kudos to you on that. But that said, though, guys, you started in the 3Ks. So everybody who makes the excuse if you can't get out of the trench with support, Blaze proves otherwise. Rolling down through the AMA a little bit more, their question was, should Deathball be nerfed or should the heroes be nerfed? And S4 basically says, let's just buff some towers, potentially, which seems like that's the general consensus. I saw Lotus say the same thing. I talked to MSS. He said something very similar, that this meta can just be changed with a few changes to how maybe the towers work, as well as just basic Deathball push. Now, do you feel like you still see Deathball as much as we sort of saw after TI, or is it Deathball fallen off just a little bit lately?
I mean, the teams have adapted a little bit. They've learned to handle it a little bit better, but it is forcing drafts. It is forcing you to react a very specific way. And if Dota is to become a more versatile game where you can pick anti-mage and you can play your game a little bit, while like I would like it 50%. I would like it 50% you have to play reactively and 50% you have to play to the style that suits your team the best. And that's obviously very difficult to match that for all these various play styles. But yeah, I think that ideally that would be kind of that middle ground there. For now, it's all reactive. It's all manageable, but only in a very specific drafting circumstance.
Makes sense. Yeah, and it's. I was gonna say this is probably one of the. I feel one of the more stagnant metas that I've seen recently. Is it doesn't. It's been a little while since we've seen the change. Hopefully, the patch comes soon. We see a little new infusion and some big changes to what is played more often. Next question was. For those who want to get better at mid, is there any reoccurring errors you see when watching pubs mid that bug you at all? And this is an interesting one because he said this in a lot of interviews before, and you actually brought it up already in your chat about support. And he said, yes, blocking the lane and aggro pulling waves are not being used enough in pubs. And those are two major things that not a lot of folks do. And that is not the initial block. He's not talking about your block coming out of the base here. He's talking about taking the opportunity at every chance when there's a bit of a disengagement to slide back in your lane and re-block the creeps and keep the equilibrium on your side. It works in mid, but it also works everywhere else. There's also obviously the aggro pulling is something that we'd never. I mean, honestly, in pubs, I say that if I'm not playing support, I see it 1 out of every 6 pubs. So these are two things that he says are going to be big changes to the way that the game is played. Do you think that those are two things that anybody could do to really improve their pub MMR?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the initial block is still pretty important, but if you get the secondary, if you fail the first one, but you get some secondary blocks, you can easily make up for it. And if you get all of them, then you really are causing some difficulty for the enemy. It's actually probably the easiest thing to do is gank a mid player that doesn't know how to do this, because you can just smoke wrap around. They're always going to be at least tiptoeing the steps, if not down in the river. So it's really advantageous to try to make sure that you're in a very defensive position naturally.
Excellent. And the last question we're going to cover is which hero currently played in other roles do you think will be played in the mid in the upcoming meta, which, by the way, was my favorite question, a really good one. And his response was Centaur, Bristleback, and Lena. How do you feel about that?
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
I definitely love the Lena mid. I've always seen that as a really strong, viable option. Maybe another buff to her Fiery Soul just to get her in there. But No, Centaur seems a little rough because of the
Yeah,
mana stuff. I mean, like, if he ever has to go up against an OD, God help him. Like, he
right,
doesn't cast a spell other than Double Edge, which has its pros and its cons. But
right.
yeah, I think I could say Bristle there. Obviously, we've seen very unorthodox pickups. I like to see Medusa there
Yep.
sometimes. Just yeah, keep it interesting, keep it diverse. But right now, I definitely see the Lena. I definitely see the Bristle. Centaur, I'd have to be sold on. I've seen it before, and I've seen it fail pretty hard.
Have to be sold on. I think we've also started to see a little bit of Pugna in the mid, and I wouldn't mind seeing some Bane return to mid as well. So
Sure.
that's what he said. That's the S4 AMA. We'll move on past that now that you guys got the summary. Let's talk tournament news, our next segment, and the first thing we're going to start out is with the news of the D2CL, the Dota 2 Champions League, a league that's been all kinds of fun in the last couple of weeks, has canceled their Chinese division. So to give you a basic breakdown, they post that they put up said that the D2CL administration regrets to inform that the games in China division have been canceled after a four-party negotiation. Organizations that represented Chinese athletes and, long story short, basically the Chinese government is sponsoring some tournaments coming up over the next few months in China, and they would not allow those players who are represented by the PW and the ACE to leave during that period to go to a different tournament. They wanted everybody here, everybody playing in that Chinese government-sponsored tournament, which I guess sort of makes sense, but it's kind of a blow for us in World Dota because we're not going to get to really enjoy that tournament as much. More importantly, D2CL is now going to be giving that spot that was for the Chinese qualifiers to another EU top-tier team. So I believe that should make it a 3 of the LAN final spots will be for European teams instead of 1 reserved for the Chinese teams. What do you think about this development?
Well, it's unfortunate,
It
obviously.
is.
We'd love to see more international interaction between the teams, especially this close past TI4. I think the timing of it makes it so that if we miss out on this opportunity, we're going to miss out on a lot of pretty much the end of the era Chinese
Yeah.
contribution to the international scene, because we're going to be seeing the Chinese New Year come up.
Yep.
Some shuffling has been alluded to by people like Mali. And yeah, I think that that's going to be kind of where the Chinese scene now is not going to be the same Chinese scene in a few months.
Yeah.
And I thought this might be kind of our last look at it, and unfortunately, that's not going to happen. So, what can you do? I mean, obviously, they tried their best. Communication issues aside, with D2CL, it's really there's only so much you can do.
Yep. So you do what you can. Unfortunately, that's the way that the cookie proverbially crumbles, though more Western Dota for us in the Champions League. Next bit of news is NVMI wins the Game Show Cup. And it was a pretty intense final. It was Na'Vi versus NVMI. Hani referred to the game as Clowny. Let's see. What else happened? Oh, the Twitch chat hashtagged TP Gaming as a nickname for this tournament final because of the amount of TPs that were used mid-fight during engagements. So the final standings on the tournament is NVMI takes the win for $20,000 in pocket, Na'Vi takes home 10, VP 7, Empire 7, so interesting things about this, NVMI run by what used to be the manager of Na'Vi, so a little bit of a maybe
Or
a
coach.
tournament. Our coach, I'm sorry, good call. The coach of Na'Vi during TI, so maybe a little bit of a, I don't know. Was there some victory sense of, hey, listen, I can lead this team to victory, guys, as they take home the lead. Na'Vi, I think, looked a little out of sorts during. Did you watch the final by any chance?
That's the one I didn't catch. I
Okay.
got a lot of the games leading up to it, but the final there, unfortunately, I was casting at the time.
Na'Vi looked very uncomfortable in a lot of ways, and I don't know if that's because NVMI had some insight into the way that they play or run the team and was able to sort of make that work for them, or if it was just that they weren't feeling it that day. But they definitely seemed off of their rhythm. Dendy didn't seem like he was fitting in with the pushes. It was just a really tough game for them, and NVMI exploited that and ran home with the big cash. So good to see, though, NVMI, a brand new team on the European scene, stepping up, making themselves known, and taking out titans like Na'Vi, Empire, and Virtus Pro to a lesser extent.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that although Na'Vi is an incredible team with an incredible roster, FNG fits their lineup very well.
Really
that
well.
players like Dendy might not fit the metagame that we have on
Yeah.
hand. Like, we've seen him thrive so much more in other patches than we have here in the Death Ball. And, I mean, Artesia has mentioned that he can't really individually perform the same way that he used to
Right.
because it just doesn't fit. But yeah, when the stylistic play of solo mid is downplayed in a certain patch, then
Yep.
you're going to get minimal contributions from players that otherwise would be dominating and controlling the game. So I think that's something that Godluck was able to exploit a little bit. I love his drafting style in general,
Yeah.
but in this case, picking up Drow most frequently is kind of a tell as far as how
Right.
he sees the tempo of the game right now. You get your marksmanship up, level 1, level 2, you just respond to the push, or you bring the push, and with that, you kind of force certain players out of their comfort zone. So kind of pushing their buttons, pinching their vulnerabilities, and yeah, I really think that that's a good idea of where his mind is at, and with respect to Na'Vi, and I think that that's going to be kind of a grudge match between the two as these teams develop. MVMI just a couple of weeks ago really didn't look like hardly a team at all, but they replaced I think it was Afro Ninja with Scandal, and they've been working together a lot ever since, making the drafts work for them. Obviously, Godblack is very revered in that regard, and obviously the playstyle is there for a lot of these players individually. So I'm glad to see them make it this far. I honestly thought they'd only make it like third place, but
Yeah.
taking the win. It's really
I
cool.
agree. So they did a great job there. That tournament plagued with all kinds of unfortunate inconsistencies. DDoS attack. At the end of the day, though, it got done. The games were great, and the tournament was successful. Next tournament to talk about is the EMC, the Excellent Moscow Cup. Quick update on the brackets. Fnatic is on top with 9 points, followed closely by NVMI, and then chomping at their heels is Empire, M5, MYM, PR, and Complexity, all tied up with 6 points. So that is our summary of where they're at right now. They have 5 games today, which is the reason that they're on my list to talk about. Pim Muckle is going to be having a very busy day over at Hitbox, but that means that you get to see a whole lot of Dota, and Dota that is relevant because the top, it is, out of all the teams, only 2 of the teams are not still in contention to take home prize money. And that means that the games today are going to be good and important, and everyone's trying to make some cash. So it'll definitely be worth a watch. We'll go over our picks later on, but check out the EMC. And the interesting part is Fnatic on top. Fnatic has had trouble up recently, big changes to their roster. I feel like they've been performing the way that they want to. And in the EMC, they're proving, hey, we're not out of it yet. So fan favorite Fnatic, still pertinent, still relevant. All right, next one is Star Ladder. This is not about the current season. This is about the future seasons, and this is an interesting one that I want to get your perspective on because I know that you've also been working with Star Ladder lately, and you and Zayori have been handling some of the casts over there. Star Ladder announces their dates for the 2015 season. They announced it this weekend. And is this just a question of there's so many tournaments nowadays that you've got to be the early bird to get the land date? Is this something where we're trying to set up more of a stability within esports? What do you think about this early announcement?
I really think this is what esports needs in general, and what, specifically for Dota 2. Obviously, like Riot's taking a different approach to how they run their scheduling over at League of Legends. But here in Dota 2, we've been in kind of chaos mode. We've been, let's just plant a flag. This is our turf. And the only thing that'll shuffle that is TI. They actually put at the bottom of the post that this is pending TI doesn't screw everything over. But yeah, in this case, I really think that advance notice is the best way to go. It's going to make it a lot easier for MLG to get back into it with their future tournaments. Obviously, we see things like ESL. They're staking out New York, and I'm sure they're going to be picking up other tournaments and other venues and stuff like that, and they need to figure this stuff out. So I think that Starlighter is making the right move here because it favors the scene as a whole, but it also, of course, favors them. They're not going to be edged out, and if there is a conflict, they're not going to be considered the bad guys. Whoever gets the initial announcement solidified and is already a respectable tournament is going to make it so that everybody else has to work around them.
Absolutely. So I think it's a good choice. It also adds stability. It guarantees the pros there's going to be games to go forward. And more importantly, it's something that I think we overlook sometimes. It's going to make sponsors feel better about their teams, right? Because you go into Dota and you sponsor a team, you're putting out a lot of money up front in hopes that you can get that return on tournament wins and advertising. The problem is most of these tournaments are not announced that far ahead of time, so a sponsor has to go in with the intention and hope that big tournaments are in the pipeline. So things like this with an early Starladder announcement means that sponsors can start to solidify contracts through 2015, knowing that they're going to have the exposure to back the spent money. And I think that that's a huge part of growing esports, allowing the sponsors to have the confidence to invest early instead of at the last second. Let's go into our interview phase. We don't have tons of time, but we've got Blaze joining us today, so we want to talk about what he's got going on just a little bit. He is, right now, I think you're officially under the term of independent contractor. Am I correct?
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's contracted, sometimes it's just I've not worked with these guys so much that it's not really necessary. But in either case, yeah, I'm working independently between studios. A lot with Beyond the Summit. Used to do a lot with Dota Talk. I've done a little bit with Join Dota as well. So, pretty much everywhere. I've just whenever I get the opportunity, man, it's always a pleasure to be able to cast for these big names and to cast for some awesome teams.
So what's it like, let me ask you that, being a independent in a studio-dominated market, a market where every big tournament that comes out, we know that there's going to be one of maybe 3 names attached to it in terms of English broadcasting. What's it like to be that guy who is the independent that they all talk to, but isn't actually on the full-time payroll?
It is a little difficult. I mean, the one thing that I think is most important is that you have to be very adaptable. You have to be flexible in your timing. You have to be able to fill in pretty much anything. You have to pick up any opportunity they give you, because essentially that is what you're getting. You are getting scraps because if they wanted to cast it, if they were able to cast it, they would. So then in that situation, it's either they're sick, they're busy, they have a simultaneous event and stuff like that. And that's where I usually come in, is helping out with simultaneous events. Sometimes I'm actually getting into exclusive content now, like you mentioned with Starlight or casting with LD, casting with Yori. Sometimes there's nothing else going on. It's just a little bit of a break for one of the other casters. And of course, currently it's a pretty unique situation with Beyond the Summit, where they don't have as much analysis coming in from the studio right now. With Merlini in Korea, with Gods having some medical issues over in Australia. And yeah, so I'm happy to be able to help them out, give them a little bit of a break, and try to drop some knowledge bombs.
Awesome. So the next transition, this one doesn't really have much to do with your independent casting career, except maybe it will, depending on what happens when it goes down. But you're going to be joining the Dads Club with a couple of us in about a month's time from now. Are you excited? What does that mean for casting? Do you have a plan in place, or is it just sort of living by the moment?
Yeah, it is kind of playing it by ear. I'm really pumped about it, nevertheless. Like, we've obviously been planning this out for well over 9 months, and we have been looking forward to this for a very long time. I'm really, in the last month, been getting into it, like, mentally. But, yeah, it's going to be difficult to do casting alongside that. My apartment it's got multiple floors and multiple rooms and stuff, but I still think that noise might be an issue, and we'll have to kind of test things out, figure things out, and obviously see how he behaves, because it really can vary between Wild Child and, the contemplative ones. But yeah, we'll see. I think that I'm definitely going to dedicate more time to my son in the first month, but after that, maybe can get a little bit more time back on the microphone and get back into it.
Excellent. So if we see him fall away just a little bit, guys, he's not leaving us. He's just having a little one. Not that bad. I can tell you, as somebody who's had a baby for 2 weeks now, as long as you have a more contemplative baby, as you've so eloquently put it, it's not so bad. He sits next to me for most of my cast and just sort of stares. So not too shabby. And I know that you shared with me an idea that I think I had been playing with as well, the idea of maybe a dad cast down the line, where you want to introduce the world to the youngest co-caster in Dota. We just have you looked into that at all? Do we know if Twitch will allow it, or is that something that we're going to have to do some investigations on?
I was trying to glance through it, but it's not one of those rules that just pops out, hey, no kids on your stream.
Right? I mean, they can do kittens. I don't see why we can't do kids. So if it helps pay for the college education, I will do just about anything. So nice play there. Let's see what else. How important, let me ask you this. This is an interesting question, and I like to ask the casters this. How important to the overall scene do you think casters really are? When I talk about scene, I mean pro and development of esports.
I think they're extremely undervalued as far as what they are, the voice that people hear. I mean, there are like maybe a 5% margin that go ahead and mute the casters and just go ahead and watch the game, and that's fine. That's the way they want to experience Dota. But the other 95% are listening, are hearing what this individual has to say, and if they're being fed false opinions, then they might unfortunately be getting the wrong idea of different players. Like, I mean, you can have a segment where like you start bashing somebody for being bad mannered, or you could just, it's very easy to incite drama. Like, you can go ahead and just like cause a problem, they're either Reddit's going to target you or they're going to target the player that you're yelling about. So I think there's a lot of influence right there off the bat. Obviously, it depends on viewership, but yeah, I think that the voice of esports, all these big Dota 2 casters, have a lot of potential to influence the way people think and just in general to take their viewers and kind of control them a little bit. And I don't want to say that people don't have thoughts of their own, but
Right.
at the same time, people will go along with those thoughts and say, okay, well, if the Divine Rapier is a great choice right now, and Toby says so, then it must be true. There are plenty of people that'll think that way, and I don't know. I kind of take that upon myself to try to be more informative in my broadcasts and say, okay, well, the reason behind it is more in depth. It's this and this and this because then they bring more thought to their own games and they take pub play to the next level. And I love that idea. That's kind of why I got into it in the first place. Is just to give people more knowledge to play around with and to improve their game. But yeah, I think that it's going back to the value of it. I think that maybe that economically it's more valuable than right now is being paid out. Like we see a huge improvement in player salaries and player stability, but caster studios and caster independents are still kind of struggling, and that's something that might need to take another look at because yes, there are a lot of, like, I would guess you could say, like, C-tier casters that really would love to jump into the spotlight, but all the same, that people know these personalities. People know the A-tier casters, and if they start refusing jobs and demanding more, I think they definitely could get it.
And it's tough because for those of you who don't know, the average and the going rate changes from caster to caster. But if it's not an A tier, and when we say A tier, we're talking your Toby and your LD, etc. Most of the casting payouts are between $10 and $15 USD, split between a caster and a co-caster for a game that could last up to an hour, if not more. You don't get more than a game an hour because of the way the schedules work out. So it can be a really tough thing for a caster who's trying to work their way into that studio position to make enough money to do it, especially during the working hours, if that makes sense. So when Blaze brings up a little bit of a difficulty in payment, he's being polite and not mentioning the numbers, but it's only fair to kind of put that out there and let you guys know sort of what the scene is looking for and asking for. Am I off base with those numbers? I think that's about what most everyone sees.
No, that seems pretty universal. Obviously, we don't know fully what the studios are getting from sponsors and things of that nature, but when it comes down to independent, yeah, you're spot on.
So to put that in perspective, an independent co and primary casting team is making about $7 an hour before tax takeaway. So we'll leave it at that, and you can decide whether or not it's time for some caster reform. That said, I want to ask one more question. You got to be involved with the quarterly Bash Casters thread over on Reddit. You had the luck of being casting Starladder with Zyori at the time that the thread came out. It was targeted, I think. It was targeted at BTS right out of the gate, so I think you were in the initial post. What's it like to be involved in that? What does it get to you? Do you find the feedback helpful? What's it like to be under attack?
What a question. That is a really tough one. There's actually some positives along with the negatives, but generally speaking, it's crippling as far as emotional. Like every post you read, you want to just like upvote it, downvote it, whatever. It's just like, make it go away almost in some regards. But essentially, the way I've begun to look at it, and it kind of started a year ago when I got my initial big, oh my gosh, these casters are horrible post that like hit #1 on the front page of subreddit. At that point, that one in particular, if I can go back to that, was essentially what made or break my career in esports, because I was genuinely contemplating quitting off of that alone. So it definitely affects people, guys, and you guys have to be careful about what you type, what you say. Would you say this to that person? Would you say it when you know that they're reading that Twitch chat instead of just spamming that it'll go away in 10 seconds? But as far as like emotional impact there, I've kind of learned to take it with a grain of salt, or like 1,000 grains of salt. Like, essentially, you have to filter and filter and filter, because there, in almost every single post that you receive, there is some level of truth. Like, you learn something that you can improve on, something that is still an issue in your casting, and that feedback is very valuable and should not be ignored. But all the same, if you don't have the thickest skin possible it'll destroy you. So you really need to take what it's saying, take what you can positively out of that, get the feedback out of it, and ignore the rest of it, because obviously the negative impact of a lot of that hate is just going to destroy you otherwise. But more recently, with this post in particular, I actually feel pretty good about it. Like, I dodged so many bullets. Like, it started out with me, like you said, in the
Right.
main topic, and then right after that, the first reply is like, "Oh, let's hate on Zaire and Capitalist, and
Yeah.
let's say Toby's awesome. Let's say LD's not doing enough, and he's taking our money." It's just like all over the place. I probably only got mentioned like a dozen times, and it was about 50-50 split, I guess, despite
Yeah.
it being a really hate-oriented thread. So
Oh, yeah.
I really feel like I did perfectly fine. I'm happy to be at least newsworthy. There
Right.
was a point in time where there were a bunch of bash threads, and my name didn't even get mentioned. I'm like, okay, well, what the hell am I doing?
Hey,
But,
I know how that goes. So it's every time there's a bash thread, I sort of go through it real quick and say, "Hey, did I make it in this time?" And it's one of those things, right? That it's sort of like it sucks, but it's the crucible of hate that forges the best of casters. And like I've said since day one, I saw it on a student shirt and have never forgotten it. Haters make me famous, and I think that that is the key to the thread. It may be tough, and it may be a difficult blow to the ego, but it's also a who's who of who are the relevant casters in the game today. So interesting, and that is you can catch that thread on Reddit once every quarter. It happens almost by clockwork once every 3 months. So keep your eyes open because it's coming back around in about 2.5 months. Now let's do a quick pick of our games of the day before we close out for the afternoon. A lot of games going on, a lot over in the excellent Moscow Cup. I did try to get you that list. Have you had a chance to pick your game for the day, Blaze?
that's a tough one. Going through it and just looking at the matchups and what we have to see, I don't know. There are so many like close matches, but
Right.
as far as what I would say might be the most interesting, might be the one that's like right off the bat. I mean, Moscow 5 Empire.
Yeah.
Moscow 5 is really variable. It can be great play for them. It can be pretty silly stuff, but I think that they might be able to be the closest to compete with Empire other than the
Yeah.
teams that consistently defeat them. So that would be really interesting. But yeah, Power Rangers. I'd go with Moscow 5 at Team Empire. It's going to be pretty soon, so
Yep.
those watching the podcast might not get to catch it, but there's always VODs.
Yep, and you can always hop over. The podcast is about to end, so you can check that one out. I will say, I know you've seen for later in the day. The other pick that I think is going to be a good game and should be a pretty even matchup is Empire versus Power Rangers, taking place in about 4 hours over on the D2CL. I think they're both aggressive teams. They both play their game, and they should be a pretty good matchup. I think Power Rangers has been on the uprise lately. Empire's had a little bit of a struggle bus, but they're right at about the same level, so that should be a pretty good pick. Also, EG has a bunch of games, and they're going up against SNA and NARV. I don't think it'll be a challenge in sense of right now EG is probably the top. I think they are technically the top ranked team in the region, and Sneaky Nicks and NARV still should be a lot of fun because it's all three are American or U.S. based teams going up against each other. And the only reason that's interesting is because a year and a half to 2 years ago, if you had told me that we would be excited to watch 3 high competitive U.S. teams, I would have been shocked. And now the North American scene has been growing by leaps and bounds, so that's very exciting, I think, for everyone. That said, guys, that's it for the show today. I do a big shout out to you guys for watching. We went a little bit long, but I think we stayed inside of our 40-minute guideline. If you like the show, follow me at Toffees_Dota2 for updates on guests and other shows going forward. Obviously, if you want to support the show and keep the advertisements out, head over to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Toffees and support the podcast. You can give me $1. You can give me a, hey, you're doing a great job, or you can tell me some feedback on things to improve. Any kind of support is obviously appreciated and keeps the show rolling. We're officially halfway towards covering our costs. Actually, a little bit over. We just got a $5 donation, so we're at $17 of the $25 needed to run the podcast without any cost, and excited to be almost there. Any last words before we sign out, Blaze?
Thanks for having me, of course. This was awesome
problem.
to be able to do this with you. Nice early in the morning, get my
Right.
caffeine boost, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks, of course, for those that tuned in. And if you guys want to look me up, I think you already mentioned it, but I'm over at twitter.com/blazecasting. I'm over casting a lot for Beyond the Summit. And beyond that, if shout out to the viewers, shout out to even the haters, because at this point, I don't know. Like the people who at least give some commentary, some feedback, you can still thrive off that.
Yep.
And that's the really where you know that you've kind of made it. You know that you've kind of developed. And at this point, I'm probably going to need some new haters because the old ones are kind of starting to like me.
Oh, wow. There you go. So if you're interested in being a new hater, at Blaze Casting is accepting applications. Thanks again, guys. We appreciate you joining us. If you're watching after the fact on the podcast or the replay, thank you for your support. I'm going to cut the stream and come back with a little bit of music, but it's been wonderful spending the morning with you. Have a great day, and as always, Toffees out.